Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jim Knotts, the President and CEO of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. And on behalf of the board, the staff, and our great volunteers, I'd like to welcome you to the annual Memorial Day observance at the Wall. As you probably realize, this year marks the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. On April 30th, we noted the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon, essentially ending the Vietnam War. We marked that right here at the Wall. But you may not realize that the final 41 deaths of those listed on the memorial behind me actually occurred 2 weeks later, between May 13th and 15th of 1975, during the Mayaguez incident. That's why we've waited until today for VVMF to officially recognize the end of the war. And now we commemorate the loss of all 58,281 names listed on the wall. As we begin today, to all of our Vietnam veterans, in this place our nation has set aside for you, welcome home. And a special welcome to our Vietnamese veterans and their families, and those of Vietnamese descent, the evacuees and immigrants joining us here today. It's good to see you with us and know that you are always welcome here. And welcome to all of our Gold Star family members, and finally, to all those who are watching online. I call your attention to the empty chair here as a symbol of the 1,572 Americans who still remain missing or unaccounted from the Vietnam War. Join us in remembering them as we continue to call for the fullest possible accounting of those who remain missing from the Vietnam War. I'd like to start by welcoming our chaplain to provide today's invocation. Please welcome Lieutenant Commander Travis Gardner, United States Navy, and please stand as you are able and remain standing briefly for the reading of the names, presentation of the colors, national anthem, Pledge of Allegiance, until the departure of the colors.
Good afternoon. What an honor and privilege to be able to pray here today. I invite you to pray with me in your faith tradition as I'll be praying in mine. Let us pray. Eternal Father, strong to save, we are humbled for the opportunity to come before you in prayer this afternoon. I pray for your blessing upon each person here today at this Vietnam Memorial on Memorial Day. This is a very special moment as we remember who served in the Vietnam War, both those that died in theater, but also those that died because of their service afterwards. This is a painful wound from years past that is still felt today. So may the healing balm of your presence here today help to bring further peace in the midst of grief. We know that we stand on the shoulders of giants, and these Vietnam service members are those giants. We pray for peace in the world and for those that currently have the watch in harm's way. For those far from home, bless them, strengthen them, protect them, and may they have a special awareness of your peace and presence today. At some point, these soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, Coast Guardsmen, and Space Force Guardians will be greeted with welcome home. So in a genuine effort utilizing your love and encouragement, we say to those here today the same words, welcome home. In your name I pray, amen.
Thank you, Chaplain. We have made it our tradition that during our annual Memorial Day ceremony, we read any names the Pentagon approved to be added to the memorial and the names of the missing who are repatriated the previous year. There were no names added to the memorial this year. I will now read the names of the 4 service members whose remains were found, repatriated, and identified in 2024. Donald W. Downing, Lieutenant Colonel, United States Air Force. John C. G. Kerr, Major, U.S. Air Force. David S. Price, Sergeant, U.S. Army. Albert R. Trudeau, Warrant Officer, U.S. Army. I'm sure you all join me when I say, welcome home. And now please welcome the Joint Armed Forces Color Guard from the Military District of Washington for the presentation of colors. Please remain standing until the colors have departed. Color Guard, present the colors. Now please welcome Master Gunnery Sergeant Kevin Benier to sing our national anthem, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Sergeant Richard Dorsey, U.S. Army, retired.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming. And the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
As a reminder, those that are active military may salute the flag. Those that are veterans may also salute the flag or put their hand over their heart. Everyone else, please, gentlemen, remove your hats and join me with the Pledge of Allegiance with the reminder that the people, the men and women on this wall, gave their lives to honor the pledge they took. I trust that we will continue to carry on that great honor. So say it with me, if you would, I would invite you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Color Guard, retire the colors.
Colors turn, march.
Everyone, please be seated. Each year, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund holds this ceremony in partnership with the National Park Service. Please welcome Kevin Grease, Superintendent of the National Mall and Memorial Parks. And as he comes up, I want to just point out that Superintendent Grease is a retired veteran and had a second career as a Department of Defense civilian before taking his current role in December of last year. So he definitely is part of our military tradition. And this is his first major military day being able to celebrate Memorial Day at all of the memorials here in Washington, D.C. Superintendent. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Jim's right. This is my first marathon memorials, which is absolutely inspiring, and I'm very honored to do this. I grew up in the great state of Nebraska, central Nebraska, which is corn country, if you've ever been there. As a matter of fact, that's all that's there. So where hard work and patriotism framed as love of country, is as part of our lives as the air, the wind, and the earth. My uncle Kenneth, who became a Vietnam veteran at the age of 19, he was my second father, so to speak. He served and he came back and he had a world experience that he should not have had at 19, but he did. He taught me selfless service. He taught me what it meant to serve. He was unable to come to the Vietnam Memorial when it opened, but he made a trip during an honor flight. I know what this wall means to people, both as a veteran and a proud member of the National Park Service, whose mission is to take care of this memorial forever. We are honored every day to be part of this. I thank you for your attendance today, and I want you to understand your presence means much for those that survive, those that have fallen, and the families of both. The National Park Service supports this wall because this wall does not glorify war, but it honors the service and the sacrifice of those who have served. It's a sacred place for grieving, healing, and learning, especially for our youth, more important now than ever before. A place where veterans can find connection and families can find meaning. National Park Service is honored to serve as a steward of this memorial. We care for the site as a sacred trust. Many of our employees, many of those in the National Park Service are veterans or families of veterans, and they take this more than just a task, but a commitment, one that they share and love. Our staff and volunteers, especially our numerous volunteers, the love that they show, work daily to maintain the dignity and reverence. We protect and preserve this site. We share its stories with the new generations. Part of that remembrance, you may not even be aware that when the memorial was opened, many family members and other veterans left items on the wall. They're not here today because we make room for others, but we have kept almost all of those. We have them in a repository several miles away. We have not forgotten. Not only do we take care of the wall, we take care of those memories. We are grateful to the partners, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, without which we could not take care of this wall to the level that it is, as Jim reminds me all the time. Thank you to the veterans, the Gold Star families, the service members, and the citizens who do not forget. Whether you've shared the sacrifice or not, you understand what it was for and how we benefit from it today. Your presence helps fulfill the Memorial Day promise that they will not be forgotten. The cause for which they fought, love of country, will not be forgotten. I close with the words of President Ronald Reagan spoken here in 1984. Those who fought in Vietnam are a part of us, a part of our history. They reflected the best in us. No number of wreaths, no amount of music or memorializing will ever do them justice. But it is good for us that we honor them and their sacrifice. May we each do our part, in whether a small way or a large way, to honor their memory, not just today, but join the National Park Service as we honor them every day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Superintendent. We have more guest speakers than usual to mark this momentous anniversary today, but I beg your indulgence for a few minutes to put some things into perspective. U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War spanned a 25-year period from 1950 to 1975. The earliest U.S. advisors in Vietnam were authorized in 1950 by President Truman. The country was split into North and South in 1954 through a peace accord when the country gained independence from France, and the U.S. ground combat troops arrived in March 1965. With the fall of Saigon on April 30th, 1975, the country was reunited as the People's Republic of Vietnam under communist control. During the final weeks, the United States evacuated about 130,000 people, most of whom eventually made their way to America. Over the next 15 years, almost 2 million Vietnamese immigrated to the United States, often through harrowing and life-threatening journeys. What became known in the U.S. as the Vietnam War saw 2.7 U.S. servicemen and women deployed to Vietnam, and 58,281 killed, whose names are remembered here. Of those who served in Vietnam, 70% were volunteers and 30% were draftees. Allied nations joined the fight alongside the Americans, including forces from South Vietnam, Republic of Korea, Australia, New Zealand, Philippines, and Thailand. Although there was never a formal declaration of war, it was a war in every sense for those who fought it, those who protested it, those back home who watched, waited, and lost loved ones. We seem to rarely remember there was initial public support for military deployments after a U.S. Navy ship was attacked off the coast of North Vietnam in the fall of 1964. But sentiment slowly turned against the war by what President Nixon later dubbed the vocal minority. In early 1968, the news media declared there was no clear path to victory, and existing public cries to end the war and bring Americans home became louder and more common. It took 7 more years and 2 more presidents to finally see the war's end. During the evacuation in the final weeks, the U.S. evacuated 130,000 people, mostly by airplane. Operation Baby Lift delivered thousands of orphans to several countries around the world, including the U.S. The final few days involved an operation called Frequent Wind, with helicopters delivering thousands to U.S. Navy ships offshore. Evacuees went to staging areas in the Pacific, most to Guam, before most made their way to the U.S. through 4 camps established around the country. The Vietnam War is unique in American history in that it is the only time that the military men and women who fought it were blamed for the war instead of the politicians who sent them. When they returned home, protesters beat, spit on, and called Vietnam veterans horrible names. Some were denied jobs. Others were ostracized by veterans of previous wars as the first generation to ever lose a war. Many Vietnam veterans point out that they won every major military campaign and blame the politicians who continually micromanaged and limited the military aspects of the war and for having no clear political or exit strategy. Reconciliation to fix the divisions at home caused by the war began with the dedication of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in November 1982. The dedication culminated a week of activities in recognition of Vietnam veterans in Washington, including a welcome home parade. The three servicemen statue was added in 1984, the Vietnam Women's Memorial in 1993, and the memory plaque in 2004, which recognizes the eventual deaths of Vietnam veterans to things like toxic exposure to the chemical defoliant Agent Orange and post-traumatic stress disorder. When asked, Vietnam veterans largely felt they had served their country honorably and committed among themselves that they would never let our country send another generation of men and women into harm's way again without the proper respect and support that they deserve. Helping our country learn the lesson to always support our troops, regardless of our feelings about any particular war, is an important part of your legacy. It started with greeting each other with the phrase, "Welcome home," recognizing each other in a way their country didn't recognize them as a group. That legacy continued through the Persian Gulf War in 1991. When Americans like myself went to war for our country, we overwhelmingly had public support for our troops, and it lasted on to the deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq after 9/11. Today, when people see men and women in uniform, they often greet them with the phrase, "Thank you for your service." This is a direct result of the efforts of Vietnam veterans to help our country remember to always support our troops. Offering that perspective, I invite our guest speaker today. He was one of those 130,000 people evacuated from Vietnam during the last days. Not yet 2 years old, his family arrived in the U.S. and settled in Washington State. He went on to become a distinguished graduate from West Point in the top 1% of his class, and he graduated magna cum laude from Georgetown Law School. He served as Associate White House Counsel during the George W. Bush administration and then deployed to Afghanistan as executive officer for a special forces company. He now spends his time as what I call a serial entrepreneur, having founded and developed several companies, and he is an Army Ranger, a board director for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. Ladies and gentlemen, France Hong.
Good afternoon, distinguished guests, fellow veterans, Vietnamese Americans, and friends. Today, we gather at this sacred place, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, to honor those whose names are etched on this wall and reflect on the enduring impact of their service. I was 13 when I first visited this memorial during an 8th grade field trip. Walking slowly along the pathway behind me, I watched the names grow higher until they towered above me. When I reached out to touch one name, I was struck by the overwhelming realization that this person had died for me and hundreds of thousands like me as had every other person whose name stretched far in each direction. Then I saw what every visitor to the wall sees, my own reflection, visible between and among and with the names of the fallen. In that moment, I knew I would dedicate my life to repaying the debt I owe to those whose names are on this wall and those who fought alongside them. I was born in the midst of war-torn Vietnam in 1973. My father was a South Vietnamese Army officer, and my mother worked for the U.S. Naval Attaché. Just days before Saigon fell, my family escaped on a U.S. Air Force C-141 Starlifter. We found refuge in America, living first in a Marine Corps tent at Camp Pendleton before settling in Washington State. I was blessed with a childhood of freedom, of opportunity, of peace, a stark contrast to what might have been. Growing up, I came to understand that my life of liberty had been purchased by the service and sacrifice of those whose names are etched here. This awakened me a deep desire to repay that debt, leading me to West Point and a commission as a U.S. Army officer, service as a peacekeeper in the former Yugoslavia, and later in Afghanistan. My journey continued through service in the White House, and years later, helping the next generation of American allies reach the shores of the U.S. after the fall of Kabul. Today, as I stand in this hallowed space, I'm struck by how my journey intertwines with countless others. All of us forever touched by those commemorated here. In this place of honor, masonry and memory merge, serving as both monument and mirror, reflecting not just who they were, but also who we are. To all Vietnam veterans, you embodied the very best of duty and devotion to country. More than 2 million Vietnamese Americans, myself included, are living proof that you made a difference. We are your legacy, grateful for your service, your example, and the unspoken burdens you still carry. We will forever honor you and the price you paid for our freedom. To my fellow Vietnamese refugees, we represent what America can and should be, not just the land of the free, but where we are free to choose to serve others. Through our contributions to this nation that welcomed us, we continue to build a tribute of gratitude. To the former South Vietnamese soldiers with us today, you embody the valor and values of our native land. As the Vietnamese proverb teaches, when bamboos grow old, young shoots spring up. Your resilience has inspired many of your children to continue your heritage of service. To those who have names of loved ones and comrades in arms etched on this wall, your fidelity ensures they are not forgotten. Through you, their sacrifice becomes a living testament of courage and commitment for future generations. By remembering our heroes, you too are heroic. And to all Americans, we reflect the promise of a nation built on shared values rather than shared ancestry, where those who choose service above self can find a home among heroes. Today, returning decades after my first visit, I find myself once more reaching out to touch these names. What I once saw as a calling, I now understand is a covenant. These names deserve more than remembrance, they deserve resolve. And so, as we honor those who laid down their lives for freedom, let us together forge a future where devotion to duty is met with gratitude, and where every generation finds inspiration in the courage of those who came before. Thank you.
Thanks, France. It's now my pleasure to introduce Vietnam veteran and nurse, Colonel Janet Southby, U.S. Army retired. In addition to her tour in Vietnam, Colonel Southby also spent time overseas in Korea, and of course, lots of time at Walter Reed Army Medical Center. She retired in 1996 after an impressive 31 years of military service. Yeah, absolutely. Her volunteer efforts continue to support military nursing through roles as past president of the Army Nurse Corps Association and the Walter Reed Society. Currently, she volunteers as an Army Arlington lady at Arlington National Cemetery. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Colonel Southby.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Mr. Knotts, for that kind introduction. I speak to you today as a Vietnam veteran representing the Vietnam Women's Memorial. While this ceremony pays special tribute to those who made the ultimate sacrifice, it also honors those who served and lived to return home, many bearing the physical and psychological scars of war. My veteran brothers and sisters, it's been a long time coming, but the 50th anniversary of the commemoration of the Vietnam Wall has strived to acknowledge all who participated, their services, sacrifices, and contributions. All Vietnam veterans, in your hearts and minds, please accept that this commemoration that began on Memorial Day 2012 and will end officially this Veterans Day 2025 has been an immense effort to recognize and give you recognition and take refuge in the derisive treatment you received when many of you returned home. It's time to let go and appreciate that our service has now been recognized. 8 names on this wall are those of nurses who died in Vietnam. Approximately 100,000 military and civilian women served in multiple support roles. Of those, 90% were nurses. My Vietnam experience began on my 22nd birthday, when the 85th Evacuee Hospital, all 300 personnel, 39 of whom were female nurses, and the hospital equipment were all loaded aboard a heavily laden troop ship. We sailed out under the Golden Gate Bridge to an unknown experience on Friday the 13th, August 1965. 18 days later, we anchored off the coast of Quy Nhon. The following day, personnel debarked down Jacob's Ladders on the landing crafts, taking us to the beach, where we clambered aboard deuce-and-a-half trucks. The ship's first officer later wrote that one of his most enduring and vivid memories stemmed from that morning. He recalled, "The sudden grim reality that you were going to war started to settle over you, and the effect was almost palpable." Once the stevedores unloaded our hospital equipment, we made our way to a valley where we set up tents and cots, established support services, and organized our medical supplies to become functional. At that time, the 85th VAC was the furthest north hospital in country. Little did we know that our deployment, steep learning curve, and initial admissions were going to enable us to care for the 1st Air Cavalry Division when sorely needed. The 1st Cav had also arrived in Vietnam aboard military transport ships between July and August 1965. That November, the 1st Cav and the North Vietnamese Army forces engaged in a long, costly battle in the Ai Drang Valley. There were significant casualties, and General Hal Moore and Joe Galloway recall this with vivid memory in their book, We Were Soldiers Once and Young. More than 250 soldiers were wounded in a period of 4 days. Most were brought to the 85th hospital direct by helicopter. Soon that we learned that the sound of more than one dust-off meant that we were on duty. During the year, we had over 7,000 cervical admissions. Only 96 were lost. The other group was 7,500 medical admissions, many with malaria, 16 of whom died. I sometimes felt I was too young or too inexperienced to bear the responsibility. Yet I soon realized that most of those injured were younger than I. They often ask, "Why are you here?" It was easy to tell them the truth. If you were my brother, father, husband, or son, I would want to know that qualified, compassionate, and skilled American nurses were here caring for you to the very best of their ability. This satisfied them and gave me purpose as we cared for more and more of their colleagues. Heat and humidity challenged our life-saving and comforting skills, particularly in the valley under tents with canvas cots. Later, we were fortunate to move and upgrade to Quonset huts with concrete floor and metal cots. The operating room and the medical ward were afforded air conditioning. For the badly injured and amputees, our goal was to stabilize and ready them for evacuation to Camp Zama or Clark Air Force Base, on the way back to the States, or on the way back to the world, as they called it. Our unit has recalled many memories over the years, but the bottom line is that we believe we were privileged, honored, and lucky to serve our fellow man when needed. For me personally, for all Vietnam veterans, and for all Americans, this wall, the statue of the 3 servicemen, and the women's sculpture have become significant memories of a challenging period in our history. Many come here and return often for comfort and solace, and to reflect on the meaning of patriotism, sacrifice, and courage. The refrain of the ballad, "We Were There," speaks for our veterans. In closing, I quote the refrain. When we were needed, we were there. We were there when we were needed. We were there. No, it wasn't always easy. It wasn't always fair. But when freedom called, we answered. We were there.
Thank you, Colonel Southby. Now a special treat to introduce our next 2 speakers, a man who truly needs no introduction here at the Wall. Please welcome the man who originated the idea for a National Vietnam Veterans Memorial, Vietnam veteran Jan Scruggs.
Well, you know, General Barry McCaffrey is someone who I've always had a great affection for. His ability to command people, men and women, his ability to do it in a way that doesn't dehumanize them. He's really a tough guy, and he's also one of the few people I've ever met who has actually thrown 3 grenades in a firefight. That's funny if you've never been in a firefight. How many people in the audience have a Purple Heart out there? Okay. Well, you know, that's it's quite an achievement, you know. It only weighs maybe 1.5 pounds. You can throw about as far as maybe as far as a baseball. But I just want you to know that I feel your pain because you got a Purple Heart. So did I, May 28th, 50 years ago. Tomorrow will be. I just wanted to point out that I got shot in a very unusual place, like back here. Okay. I think I look around me today and talk to so many nice people. It's just a fantastic country we live in. And I would like to say a good thank you, ladies and gentlemen, to the United States Army, Air Force, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard, because they will keep us safe. So I became very interested in psychology when I was in college, and I came up with an idea for PTSD. And why don't we take these PTSD veterans and give them something big to live with? And that was successful, and the whole project ended properly because it just had to do it. So many guys were committing suicide, and there were so many bad things happening, and it was rough. But I'm feeling pretty good here, and I think the good old USA gets a bum rap. Let's just stick together, okay? Yeah, man. You see, General Barry McCaffrey is just, he needs a little introduction. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel has been a supporter of me and the Vietnam Veterans Memorial for decades. And back when a time came in which his career was on the line, some guys came in to kind of push him around, so they didn't like Myolin's design. This beautiful design. They didn't like that? Okay, let's go for it. And anyway, it's a fantastic friendship that's gone on for year after year. Same with Barry McCaffrey. And he served in the United States Army 32 years, multiple tours in Vietnam. And the Saddam Hussein and Desert Storm, he put that all of the pieces together. So, thank you. And Bob Dubeck is right here. Sure. Yeah, he's a great lawyer. He's a great lawyer. And so he became the lawyer for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, and we had a great time. Hey, okay, thank you all very much.
I was going to help Jan up to the podium, and I realized I have no better. So, Jan, thanks for that introduction. More importantly, thanks for your lifetime of leadership. Jan came home from Vietnam as a badly wounded E4 with no connections and took on the notion of establishing a memorial to our fellow Vietnam veterans against all odds. Recruited a lot of people that helped you, one of whom Senator Hagel will be speaking, but it was still a triumph. How about a round of applause for Jan Scruggs' leadership? And Jim Knotts and very small staff, our president and CEO, day in, day out, this has millions of visitors to this memorial, dozens of important events, foreign visitors. Thank God for the National Park Service and the work they do to support the memorial. But day in, day out, Jim and his people do a magnificent job. Alan Bucklew, I'm not sure if he's here, chairman of the board. Alan, thanks for your leadership, and the board members who provide not just governance, but sort of looking ahead over the horizon. This beautiful memorial has to be here in 100 years, so thanks for your dedication. Senator Chuck Hagel, a friend, a Secretary of Defense, a U.S. Senator, a phenomenally successful business person, but his proudest title was Buck Sergeant, Infantry, badly wounded in combat as a soldier. How about a round of applause for Chuck Hagel? Janet, your remarks were enormously moving. I can't imagine a more traumatic situation to work in as a 22-year-old young nurse than Vietnam, with these catastrophic casualties coming in day and night, to include from the 1st Cav Division. So thanks for your service. France, thanks to your remarks, one of the enduring good things that came out of the Vietnam War was 1.3 million or more Vietnamese citizens who came to the United States, who are such magnificent citizens and are now helping run the country. So France, thanks for your service. A bunch of my family are here. My wife, Jill, of 62 years. She's been with me through a lot of moves and a lot of combat tours. Daughter of a World War II veteran, 11th Airborne Division, 3 combat jumps in the Pacific. Her brother, Skip, who's no longer with us, infantry buck sergeant, recon squad leader in the 101st Airborne at Hamburger Hill. My daughter, Tara Larson's here, Army nurse. Her son, Jack's with her, major in the Washington National Guard. My son, Colonel Sean McCaffrey, 3 combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. The family tradition continues. 2 of his sons are in the United States Air Force. They were sort of fleeting up, Jim. I would be remiss to not mention my youngest girl, Amy McKinney, who's here with her husband, Mike McKinney. She came as a teenage college girl to bid farewell to 24th Infantry Division as we deployed out of Fort Stewart, Georgia, to the Gulf War. I want to mention also Captain Dave Reagan, my former brother-in-law, killed in action August 1964 as part of a Vietnamese Ranger battalion. All 4 advisors were killed. The country was barely in country. I think they probably had 20,000 troops, mostly aviation and support. They started putting advisors in the field. When those 4 Americans were killed, it made front page news in the New York Times. Of course, as we know, we went on to suffer even more atrocious casualties in the following years. Colonel Jen Easterly, I just wanted to recognize her here with her son and her dad. He's also a Vietnam veteran. She's one of the nation's electronic warfare and cyber warfare experts and just led that government agency in the last administration. Most important people here to me are B Company, 2nd of the 7th Cavalry, 1968-69, and their families who supported them. We had our final reunion today. We went over to Arlington National Cemetery and had a service around First Sergeant Emerson Trainor's grave. Would you stand up, the families and the soldiers of B Company, 2nd and 7th? Go ahead. Some have trouble getting up. The first sergeant had been badly wounded as a private in B Company, 2nd and 7th Cav in Korea. He came back to be our first sergeant in the days when anyone over the age of 30 was hard to find in the field. It was just too difficult a life. He was a tremendous NCO and a lifelong friend. Rich Dorsey, who led the Pledge of Allegiance, was my RTO. We got hit by an RPD machine gun about 20 feet away from us. I lost most of the left arm. Rich got hit right through the helmet, went down like a sack of wheat. I said, that's the end of Rich, but he had a good, hard infantry head, which sort of semi-scalped him and messed him up a little bit, and he came back to a life of service in the Salvation Army. So, Rich, thanks for your service then and now. A lot of our B Company veterans are too old to travel, having some health issues. Jerry Gass is here. Platoon Sergeant played a major role in keeping us together. Ed Holtz, who's out in Boise, Idaho. Mick McMahon, Artillery FO, Silver Star recipient. And I might add, the only other person in the company who I was sure knew where he was. I want to mention Melissa Kalinowski, who's here, been my lifelong, 30 years now, executive assistant. She's been our field first sergeant for B Company reunions. Let me talk also about the class of 1964 out of West Point. We had 24 killed in action. 20% of the class was killed or wounded. 100% of the class essentially went to Vietnam. Half the class served a second tour. Many of us served longer. I'm very proud to be one of their numbers. They're having their own memorial service today, and many of them couldn't be here. Normally at this time, in talking to Vietnam vets, I always want to use the term welcome home. And as we've said, it's a terrific greeting for those of us who served. Welcome home, brother. And I always go to the keep these numbers in mind now, 2.6 million of us served in Vietnam. The 1995 census asked people to identify themselves as Vietnam veterans. 9.5 million claimed to have served. In 2000, the census again asked the question, and 13.8 million claimed to have served. So I'd like to welcome all of you home, however you served and wherever. Talking about the Vietnam's difficult. It was an epic tragedy for the U.S., for the Vietnamese, for our allies. It was 15 years of fighting. It was over 58,000 killed in action. It was over 300,000 wounded. It was 75,000 maimed. Thank God for the VA who has cared for our wounded. It was also a tragedy for the Vietnamese. More than 1 million North Vietnamese Army troops in VC were killed in action. Jan Scruggs and I co-chaired a delegation to Vietnam 2 weeks. It was a tremendous experience. Some of the other members of that delegation are here today. And they told us they'd lost 2 million troops killed in action. There were probably 2 million civilians in North and South Vietnam killed. There were 250,000 ARVN soldiers killed. I served as Vietnamese airborne, some of the bravest soldiers, most disciplined soldiers I saw in my life. So it was a huge loss. Who served? It was the youngest Army we ever put in the field. Average age was 19. In World War II, it was 26. It was the best educated Army we ever put in the field. 79% were high school graduates or better. As Jim Knott's already mentioned, 2/3 were actually volunteers. At that point in the war, when you looked at the entire active guard and reserve population, some 14% were draftees. When you looked in country, it was 30% draftees. When you looked at B Company, 2nd and 7th Cavalry, it was 100% draftees. It was the first sergeant and I were normally the only 2 regular Army soldiers with previous military experience. They were tremendous troops. 97% were honorably discharged. They did their job. They served with dignity and pride. 90% of those in combat still will say they're proud to have served. They were incredible soldiers. When you looked at B Company in combat, and by the way, every soldier had a different, sailor, airman, Marine, Coast Guard, had a different experience in Vietnam. Depending on the year you were there, your MOS, where you were in country. When you looked at B Company 2nd and the 7th, it was intense combat. It was over time, likely you were going to be killed or wounded. It was, fortunately, thank God for the incredible medevac and the medical units behind us. We would tell people, if we put you on the helicopter and you're still alive, you're going to rejoin your families. But it was a dangerous world. You know, we lived out there like wild animals. We dug like moles. We camouflaged. We had OPSEC. We rehearsed battle drills. We were violent in the attack. And the soldiers were all teenage boys. The NCOs were shake and bake out of Fort Benning, Georgia. They were the cream of the crop that were draftees. Short education, get off the Huey at 8 o'clock at night in our company, and in the next day or so, they'd be a squad leader. The 2 honor graduates at NCO school graduated as staff sergeants and showed up frequently as platoon leaders on the first day of combat. What do we conclude out of all this? Armies don't fight wars. Countries fight wars. The country went to war for a lot of good reasons, which was basically global communism, an evil ideology that suppressed and governed people and took away opportunity. We fought them in North Korea. We fought them in Europe with deterrence. We fought them in South Vietnam. Congress turned off the funds of the war, and that was the end, because the country finally decided, I think, correctly so, that the political leadership of 5 U.S. presidents and their administrations did not know what they were doing. They did not have a strategy to achieve a political or military outcome. There was no path to victory. The political will of North Vietnam was ironclad. The Russians and the Chinese stayed in there, and the war ended in a disaster. When we ask ourselves, though, as veterans, what should we think about our service, we should be proud. We served bravely. The soldiers took care of each other in combat. They went home to communities, and they've become terrific citizens, and they took care of their communities there. We've been a bedrock of patriotism in the country for many years. Let me end my remarks with my favorite piece of poetry from World War I. And it exemplifies why we're here with these names on this beautiful memorial, those who fought and died in service of America. They shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. God bless the Vietnam veterans and those who fell. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, General McCaffrey. And our final speaker today is another person who needs a little introduction, but Jan's going to give him a great one anyway.
I want to thank General McCaffrey and all of our people today who are a part of this event. There's more to come this evening, and it's important to be right about things, and it's important to do the right thing. And the integrity that Mr. Hagel has is really legendary. It's fantastic. And I would like to thank Barry McCaffrey and each and every one of you for being in the audience. And we're getting close to ending this. There you are.
Thank you, Jan. Jan, thank you. And thank you to our previous speakers. Each presented a dimension and a dynamic of the Vietnam War, the people, the causes, the numbers, and I think reflected in a very relevant and emotional way what this war was about and the different dimensions of why we fought it, why we were there, why it lasted so long, and the consequences. What I want to do in the few minutes I have is not give a speech. I know you'll be relieved. As a former senator, I picked up bad habits. I want to make some and share with you some reflections and remembrances as far as I'm concerned about my time in Vietnam. And I will start where the superintendent began with his comments and reflections about growing up in central Nebraska. I, too, grew up in Nebraska. My brothers and I lived in 7 towns all over the state before we graduated from high school. My brother Tom and I served actually together in Vietnam in 1968 with the 9th Infantry Division in the Mekong Delta. Many of you know about that year. I suspect many of you out there served in 1968. That year produced the largest number of casualties in the history of the Vietnam War. We sent home almost 17,000 dead Americans in that one year. My remembrances about veterans before I became a soldier and a veteran began when my brothers and I were growing up in the 1950s and 60s in Nebraska, in those little towns where the center of the universe was the American Legion Club and the VFW Club. Everything rotated and revolved around those veterans clubs because the majority populations in those little towns, and Nebraska was not unlike all other states, were World War II veterans. My dad was a World War II veteran, almost 3 years in the South Pacific. All my uncles were. Almost everybody in those little towns were World War II veterans. So my brothers and I had the great benefit of learning from those veterans and how they shaped these men and women, how they came back and they led and they built this country. And they did the things that were important for our future. So we had a real advantage, I think, those of us growing up in those days in that first generation after World War II. And that's really what shaped my brother Tom and my attitudes, I think my other brothers as well. And one of the things that has struck me, and every year, like all of us, as we grow older, and maybe become a little wiser, that's not always guaranteed, but at least you learn more, and you learn more about yourself, and you learn more about others. Where I've gotten to over the last years is that veterans, regardless of what war they were in and what they did, but they were always about making a better world. Making a better world. And isn't that really the whole purpose for all of us? Especially in a free country where you have options and you have opportunities to make a better world, to do something a little better than maybe you'd experienced before, leave the world better than you found it. I've always found that's the common denominator and the equalizer in our veterans' service and what they did, regardless of the war, regardless of the politics of it. They served their country. And what came of that are values, a value system that's absolutely critical to any society. Honesty, decency, respect for each other, listening to each other. And you can't build a free society without that. And you need the leaders, generation after generation, to help our young people understand that. And when our leaders fail you and us in that area, we've got a problem with the future, and will have. And it's not the young generation coming up, it's not their fault, it's our fault. That we didn't do enough to show them what's right and wrong, and a value system that you live by. And veterans have always done that, have always done that. I want to compliment Jan again, and Bob Dubeck, and all those who joined Jan back in the late 1970s and into the early 80s to build this wall. When you think of it, what Vietnam veterans did for this country, aside what's been talked about today, it was the Vietnam Veteran Memorial that was the first memorial, war memorial, in this town. Before this memorial was built, there was no World War II memorial. There was no World War I memorial. There was no Korean War memorial. It took the Vietnam veterans to build this and make something of that war, something very positive and good that came out of that war, a recognition of service. As difficult as that service is to recognize, and painful for the families who lost the men and women on this wall. But something beautiful came out of that. And I think that's a real tribute to Vietnam veterans, and especially the leaders, starting with Jan Scruggs, who produced that. You know, the world is imperfect. Everyone makes mistakes. And at this time in our country, in the world, when there's so much conflict, so much dissension, the imbalance of the world upside down in many, many ways, it's so important that veterans continue to lead in a very, very positive way, because it's the one group that has unconditionally helped this country, unconditionally led, unconditionally emphasized and lived the values and the qualities that we respect, we admire, and that we need in a free society. So I thank every veteran here, regardless of the service, regardless of a war, what war you served in, Afghanistan, Iraq, it doesn't make any difference. You served and you did something very special for our country. And that in itself is pretty special. And use that in ways that no other group of people can use any experience they've had. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been an honor to be part of this for so many years and to help Jan a little bit over the years. And every Memorial Day, my brothers and I talk, and my friends and I talk, like you all talk and your families talk on this special day. But it isn't just this day, it's every day. And I think that's important too, that we recognize it as every day, that we continue to help and make a better world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Secretary Hagel, General McCaffrey, Jan. Your comments and perspectives, I think, help all of us mark this special anniversary of 50 years since the end of the war. If I could now ask those who are participating in our laying of wreaths today to please come forward. While our wreath bearers are getting into position, I'd like to take a moment to say a few thank yous and provide some updates from the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. First, I'd like to give my personal thanks to all of our Yellow Hat volunteers. You've seen them around this morning. They are National Park Service volunteers who do so much to honor and remember our veterans every day. And the amazing staff of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund for their hard work all year long. I hope we'll see many of you at upcoming events here later this year. Next month, we'll induct 744 Vietnam veterans into our In Memory program, the largest number of veterans ever honored in one single year. And on Father's Day, we'll host our annual Father's Day Rose Remembrance. Now, due to the announced military parade happening on Constitution Avenue, right behind me, behind the wall, over Father's Day weekend, VVMF will host the In Memory ceremony and our annual Father's Day Rose Remembrance event in Alexandria, Virginia, in front of our mobile replica of the wall that we call the Wall That Heals, which will be set up on the grounds of the George Washington Masonic National Memorial. While not our original plan, the VVMF staff has done an amazing job conceiving and planning for an event that will offer those Vietnam veterans the same respect, dignity, and honor we would show while here on the National Mall. Now, allow me to direct your attention to the representatives of several of our nation's leading veteran service organizations as they join us in the laying of wreaths in honor of the fallen. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome bagpiper Chris Jackson, who will be playing Amazing Grace. National Park Service. Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. Vietnam Women's Memorial. American Gold Star Mothers. Gold Star Wives of America. Sons and Daughters in Touch, the Gold Star Children of Vietnam Veterans. Vietnam Veterans of America. Associates of Vietnam Veterans of America. Vietnam War 50th Commemoration. The American Legion. Military Order of the Purple Heart. Disabled American Veterans. Paralyzed Veterans of America. Sons and Daughters of the Vietnam War. Vietnamese American Uniformed Services Association. (8 o'clock to 9 o'clock) PTSD class, Washington, D.C. Washington Metro Area Navy Nurse Corps Association. The Navy Nurse Corps Association. U.S. Army AmeriCal Division. Vietnam Veterans Memorial Volunteers. U.S. Army OCS Alumni Association. 25th Infantry Division. 28th Infantry Regiment Association. A6 Intruder Association. 9th Infantry Division. Verizon Veterans Advisory Board. 1st Marine Aircraft Wing Association. Scottish American Military Society. Canadian Veterans. Patriots of Valor. Veterans Voice of America. And so that they could be in front of panel 30 East, Veterans of Foreign Wars, and all other units laying wreaths today. In closing, let me encourage each of you to reach out and thank our veterans and their families, not just on Memorial Day, but every day of the year. Our ceremony concludes with the playing of taps by Master Sergeant Amy McCabe. As you are able, please stand and remain standing until the Park Service Honor Guard departs the area after the playing of taps. Please remain in place while the National Park Service Park Police Honor Guard departs. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming today and for joining us online.